Welcome to Module 1 of the Inclusion of Special Populations Training 703 KAR 5:070. My name is Krista Mullins, and I'm a program consultant in the Office of Assessment and Accountability. Module 1 will discuss the regulation overview and general conditions for inclusion of special populations. There will be some allegation prevention and best practices tips and a check for understanding at the end of the module. The state-required assessment and accountability programs are inclusive of all students at specific grade levels. The purpose of this regulation is to provide direction for the inclusion of special populations in the state-required assessment and accountability programs. This training will discuss the populations included in this regulation, general conditions for accommodations, and specifics for each accommodation. Throughout this presentation, when you see page numbers referenced, they correlate to the page where you can find the information in the regulation. Let's begin with the introduction to the regulation. The General Assembly is committed to ensuring that every student has the opportunity to succeed in school. The Inclusion of Special Populations regulation describes student populations who may need accommodations to be successful. Accommodations are intended to provide support for students during instruction to access and learn content, as well as to demonstrate content achievement during assessment. Accommodations do not reduce learning expectations and are not intended to be a substitute for specific instruction. Accommodations shall be individualized and specifically designed to aid the student as the student learns. Special populations defined in this regulation include students with disabilities who have an individual education program or IEP, students who attend alternative programs and state agency children, students whose primary language is not English or EL, students who receive home or hospital instruction, students who have a 504 plan, and students with temporary medical conditions who need accommodations for participation. The provisions in this document are applicable to all students except those who are 21 years of age or older who are part-time students attending less than 6 hours per day. Students enrolled in an adult GED program and are not officially enrolled in a Kentucky public high school. A student's IEP team or Admissions and Release Committee, ARC, must meet annually to determine a student's least restrictive environment and learning plan. The team will use data-driven results, observations, formative and summative assessment, as well as other determining factors to place a student and determine accommodations for state assessments. There are 3 options for inclusion in a state assessment. They are with no accommodations, which means an accommodation is not needed or the student is not eligible at the time of testing. Those with accommodations mean that the ARC or IEP team have met and developed the annual plan to include those accommodation types permitted for the student to utilize on the state assessment. The last option is alternate assessment, which means even with access to the necessary accommodations, the student is still unable to access the general curriculum in a manner equivalent to their peers. The ARC or IEP team would then complete the participation guidelines for the Kentucky alternate assessment and revisit their eligibility for that participation level on a year-to-year basis. A student's ARC is responsible for determining which accommodations, if any, are necessary to provide individualized supports. Let's take a look at some general conditions. School staff must make available to the student accommodations used consistently as part of routine instruction and classroom assessment, but may not instruct their students on when to use accommodations. Proctors may review with the student the accommodations in their IEP, 504 plan, or Program Service Plan, or PSP. Remind students that proctors are there to provide the accommodations and revisit this information at the beginning of each test session. Students have the right to decline use of an accommodation. Once the student refuses the accommodations, the test administrator may only resume the use of the accommodation during that day of testing at the request of the student. If a student has adult provided accommodations, example, reader, scribe, or assistive technology, the adult or technology shall be in the testing room prior to testing and shall remain there during the testing period. Accommodations should always be based on individual student needs and not solely on their disability category. Not all students within a certain eligibility category require the exact same accommodations. Evaluation information and ongoing progress data should support the need for accommodations in the specified area of need. Accommodations shall be part of the student's ongoing instructional program and not introduced immediately prior to the state required content assessments. Caution shall be used prior to making IEP, 504 plan, or PSP changes related to accommodations near or within the state required content assessment window. Changes may occur based on the time an annual meeting is to occur. It is important that any change made is supported through data and evidence. The use of technology shall be the first accommodation considered before adult accommodations, for example, reader or scribe, if feasible. A shortage of workstations, software, physical space, or training shall not be used as a reason for failing to provide assistive technology as an accommodation. To ensure student needs are met, test administrators and parties involved with testing the student shall be informed of all accommodations of the most recent version of the student's IEP, 504 plan, or PSP prior to state required content assessments. Changes in the administration of the assessment or recording of student responses shall be consistent with the services identified on the student's IEP, 504 plan, or PSP. Every year, there are many allegations that include violations of the Inclusion of Special Populations regulation. There are several slides in this training that provide prevention tips and best practices to assist in successful assessment administration. The first best practice is to always make sure a student receiving accommodations has a current plan in place and that all test administrators and the student are aware of the most up-to-date accommodations listed in the plan. Those plans need to be locked in Infinite Campus so that the students will be included in any assessment roster pools. If a plan changes near an assessment window, be sure to document well within the plan and any conference summary the justification for the change. If an accommodation is on a student's plan, it must be provided. One frequently asked question is, if this accommodation is on the plan but the student hasn't used it all year, do we provide it? Yes, accommodations on a plan should be provided, and that is non negotiable. The team monitoring the student plan should be reviewing accommodations regularly to make sure they are appropriate and necessary for inclusion. It is never the decision of a test administrator whether the student does or does not receive their accommodations. This is the first check for understanding in this training. Please pause the video and read through these yes or no questions and then resume the video so we can discuss the answers. Number 1, are all special populations included in the state required assessment and accountability programs? The answer is yes. Those populations are defined on page 3 of the regulation. Question 2. Should a student with a specific learning disability in reading automatically receive a reader and scribe for accommodations? The answer is no. Accommodations are individual to each student and should not be a blanket set of accommodations based on a disability or English proficiency level. Pages 4 and 5 of the regulation. Question 3. Do students have the right to decline an accommodation? Yes. Page 4 of the inclusion regulation states that students may decline an accommodation. Question 4. Can a student plan change near an assessment window? Yes. A student plan may change when appropriate. If the meeting falls near an assessment window, be sure to document the justification for the change in any summary and within the plan. This can be found on page 5 of the regulation. This concludes Module 1 of the Inclusion of Special Populations Regulation training. Please progress through all 4 modules to complete the training. If you have any questions about anything we discussed or require further clarification, please contact our office by emailing dacinfo@education.ky.gov or by calling 502 564 4394.